Hello. Hi. Very excited to be here. I'm Naka Kondo. I am the senior editor for the Economist Intelligence Unit. I'm usually based in Tokyo. Very excited to be in Hong Kong. And our next session is Spotlight on Hong Kong. So I would like to introduce to you the three very inspirational advocates in this area. So would Monica and Anita and Michael please come up on the stage and make sure you find your spot, and I will make a proper introduction. Thank you. So Monica is the director for talent development inclusion at Gilead Sciences, and you're based in Hong Kong. And Anita Leung, you're the managing director at Nomura, also based in Hong Kong. And Michael Vidler, a senior solicitor at Vidler Co Solicitors. Thank you for coming on to this stage today.
Pleasure.
Now, with the breakthrough in Taiwan, I think this is a very topical theme that we're all very interested in, and we're trying to see what the future is for Hong Kong. And in so discussing, I think the LGBT community in different places face different challenges. And Anita here today is a specialist on Hong Kong, and I would love to hear from Anita what the particular cultural, perhaps, challenges that the LGBT community faces here in Hong Kong and what the landscape looks like.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm a specialist, but I'm born and brought up in Hong Kong, so I think I am probably can represent some of the Hong Kong people. I think for my generation and my parents' generation, we brought up not knowing what LGBT plus is about. If we have a classmate who have a single parent, we consider it quite weird not to talk about the LGBT plus society. Only, I think, until, and my generations, I think only until probably when we start working, going into an environment, and I was quite privileged. I joined Nomura about 8 years ago. That was the first time I encountered really what LGBT plus is about. It's the first time I went to an unconscious bias training to learn about how to communicate and connect with people. In the past, it's very simple. I go to people and say, what are you going to do with your partner or your husband and wife? I now have to switch it into, how you're spending a weekend with your partner. So I think, from a Hong Kong perspective, it's not really a challenge per se, but we just grown up without understanding and knowing what LGBT plus is about. And I don't think the society in general has a lot of public education on that. I think there's a lot more focus on diversity and inclusion without specifically talking about LGBT+. I think that's probably become an issue when you go to, talking about law, establishment later on. A lot of pushback from government is that you don't get enough people to support that. And that's the reason why that, because most of the people don't really understand and have connected with the subject.
Thank you. And I would like to open up the floor. If you look at your app, we are going to want to do a live polling on this question. Do you think it is difficult to innovate in diversity and inclusion without legal and societal change? And we're going to look at the results at the end of the session. But since the breakthrough in Taiwan happened in court, many people are thinking maybe the way forward in Hong Kong is through the judiciary system. And on this point, I would like to ask Michael, on your perspective, on how far Hong Kong has come and perhaps some of the cases that you've seen and where you see Hong Kong heading going forward.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Economist, for hosting this and giving me the opportunity to speak to you. Unsurprisingly, as a litigator, I'm going to say that litigation is or has been one of the ways in which we've been able to advance LGBT rights in Hong Kong. going back to what Anita says, we used strategic litigation and the publicity that we managed to generate from that to increase discussion. I think it's safe to say that most people before the W case would have not known what a difference between a transvestite and a transgendered person. Many may still not get that, but at least there was a discussion in relation to the issue. And same with the basic issues of LGBTI rights. Since 1991, when homosexuality was legalized, there was no real discussion. And it was only with the Billy Leung case when we consciously went to the press to get the issue out there that there was a discussion about the issue. And I was talking at Hong Kong University to students who were asking the most basic, crass questions. But it was indicative of the fact that they knew nothing, they were taught nothing. They were all brought up in good Catholic or Christian schools where the discussion was taboo. Yes, I think litigation has served a role in that regard. But I think more importantly, litigation has served a role because the makeup of our legislative council at the moment realistically precludes the advancement of LGBTI rights through legislation. The government has clearly no political will. And so because of our common law system, which allows the development of law not only through statute change, but also through judicial precedent, i.e. case law, it means that we've been able to advance LGBTI rights in the face of government resistance. As I mentioned before, we've had the Billy Leung case in 2005, to do with bringing down the age of consent to that of heterosexual couples. We had a couple of skirmishes, the Cho Man Kit case and the T case, involving protecting public broadcasters, RTHK, Hong Kong's version of BBC, protecting their right to broadcast programs about LGBTI issues without complaint. The T case concerned a case where the police broke up an Idaho demonstration. So that touched on issues of freedom of expression and right to public discourse in a public place without a license. And that led us on to the W case. And the W case was although it related to transgender rights and the right of a transgender person, post-operative transgender person, to marry in their acquired gender, it really paid to the government's, at that time, principal argument against same-sex marriage, which was that marriage was an inevitable consequence of, or procreation of marriage were inextricably linked. So we delinked that. And as just an indication of the resistance we've had from the government, in relation to the W case, the court suspended the judgment in that case for a year to allow the government to introduce legislation. Clearly, the Court of Final Appeal expected the government to introduce this legislation within that time frame. We still haven't had it, and that's after 5 years. And in relation to the Billy Leung case, although the court ruled sections of the Crimes Ordinance were unconstitutional, it took the government 8 years to amend about 3 or 4 words in the Crimes Ordinance to bring the legislation in line with the court's judgment. So, that's an indication of the resistance that we're facing. Moving on, we've had other skirmishes arising from the government's inaction in the W case to introduce legislation, with the QR and Henry Zay case. And more recently, perhaps one mostly in your minds, the QT case, which was the first time we established that same-sex marriage from abroad need be recognized in Hong Kong. And that was important because, in strategic litigation, it's stepping stones, and so we were breaking down this resistance through the courts. And after that, there's been a couple of cases built or based on the QT case. So with the Angus Leung case related to recognition of same-sex marriages from abroad for civil service benefits. And we've got the Nick Infinger case, which is recognition of foreign registered same-sex marriages for housing benefits here in Hong Kong. So that's the point of strategic litigation. You build things up slowly and you break down the legal arguments against change. And today, the MK case is being argued. My personal view is it's a little bit premature, and we should have embedded the QT case a bit better with some more litigation concerning inheritance and adoption rights. But be that as may, it is going ahead, and we shall see how the courts deal with that. My fear is that although the legal arguments are there, the courts will buckle to the pressure from the government and perceived societal resistance. That's my concern, which of course other cases could have helped prick that bubble. And as a final indication of the sort of resistance, we're still waiting after a year for judgment in a case which is challenging the remaining homophobic legislation, criminal provisions and sentences that are on the statute book still 15 years after the Gilead Leung case. So the government clearly is not taking proactive steps. So to advance rights, you have to go through the courts. But my philosophy has been, in doing that, you can then raise awareness through the publicity that the cases bring. And, as I'll allude to perhaps later on, the public sector has very much a role, business has a role in pushing forward and changing views and attitudes. When I'm asked the right question, I'll tell you about that.
Thank you. As you've mentioned what the roles of the private sector could be, I'd like to ask a question to Monica. So what at Gilead Sciences, if not just specific to Hong Kong, but perhaps as a region in Asia, do you do to further the culture of inclusiveness for LGBTQ community?
So Gilead Sciences has been working actively with the LGBT community for over 30 years. We were formed at the height of the HIV epidemic, where at the time a diagnosis was a death sentence. And we'd committed at the time to cure HIV and have actively provided treatments that have simplified and transformed the HIV community. And from that time on, we've been passionate supporters and defenders and advocates of the marginalised, particularly those in this highly stigmatised disease. And the LGBT community is a key part of that. So we've been actively working with the LGBT community for about 30 years in a number of ways. And in Asia, a lot of our work has been with the community externally in a sponsorship capacity. And most recently, we're working with the community through grants that support stigma, discrimination, and inclusiveness in the workplace is one that we're launching this year. So I also agree that there's a lot that businesses can do. Gilead is particularly passionate about inclusion and diversity. We believe very strongly that only through attracting and keeping the very best talent, the very best diverse talent that represents our communities, that we can really drive our mission of transforming life-threatening diseases. So within Asia, internally, we have been driving a number of things. So maybe if I speak globally for a minute and then sort of bring the story locally. I guess the Gilead story starts globally and then moves into Asia. So globally, we implemented inclusion as a value in 2016. And since then, we've been putting a lot of investment and resources internally. We have set up a number of ERGs, so employee resource groups. The LGBT and allies group is the largest of those. We have implemented a number of policies, and at the minute we are focusing on, I think in the next month we'll be releasing one on our transgender community, as well as a playbook to help those that wish to transition whilst they're working with us. We've rolled out numerous trainings, unconscious bias, diversity of thought. But I think most importantly, I think for us, is that we've really got that commitment at the top. So we've identified, we have a diversity council that's CEO-led, and as a result of that, we are driving some very accountable measures, and so in region, and really only launched about a month or two ago, we have implemented a process of diversity action planning. So each of our regions, each of our countries are identifying what locally relevant diversity and inclusion targets that will be measured at the global level. They're quarterly reviews that will measure our progress. So we're really wanting to put some accountability and measurement around what inclusion means locally at a relevant level. We've also implemented a inclusive leadership journey initiative. So as part of listening to our feedback from our employees, there's certainly opportunity to improve the inclusiveness of our environment. So this initiative is a top-down initiative, so hearing what you're saying around to drive change, you do need to lead it from the top. So we're driving we're implementing a leadership inclusion journey that is around increasing the collaboration, the openness, and our feedback community locally. We're about 4 months in and getting some really good traction. And I have to say that I'm super excited because as I go around the region, just to hear our senior leaders talk, discuss, contemplate, and start actioning initiatives around what that is, what that could mean locally, and really starting to get momentum at an employee level as well. So it's an exciting time, but we are very much at the beginning of that journey.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just add a little bit?
Definitely.
I think for a lot of companies, while you have a lot of structured programs, I think those on the seats here today would probably have those. Like us, we sponsor, for example, and support the QT case. But I think the small gesture is also important. I think the firm that I'm in, Nomura, we did a lot of small things. Like we distribute cupcakes on Valentine's Day to show that love is for everybody. I think that I mentioned earlier, I think the challenge we have in Hong Kong, for example, is the awareness, is people understanding of the agenda. So these small gestures, we invite people to movie nights on, LGBT theme movies as well to, get the broader population, awareness, not into a deep understanding, but, to start the journey and pave along the way. I think that's also important outside the very big, large-scale structured programs.
Thank you.
Could I just add in from the legal perspective what the private sector can sort of do and what
Definitely.
they have done? Certainly in relation to, from the legal perspective, what was very impressive for me was the intervention applications by, I think it was 15 banks and 16 law firms, or the other way around, to give the business case to the court for inclusion and diversity and for recognition of foreign same-sex marriages. Whilst the applications were ultimately not successful, they very much serve the purpose of informing the court of the views of major employers here in Hong Kong. And of course, once read, they can't be unread by the court, even though they weren't officially relied upon by the court. Certainly, they were referenced in the judgment, and certainly we were permitted to reference what was said in the interventions in our submissions to the court. So that was very important. That leads on, in my view, to the importance of leading industries. Those are two examples, the banking and legal sector. The importance of these industries which are perhaps at the apex of employment aspiration for, let's face it, local families and kids. If these industries are leading the way, and they are openly, very openly, by seeking to intervene in a case for inclusion, if these companies are openly saying this, then it makes it very difficult for these families to, around the table, to discuss in a sort of a homophobic way when they're talking about, oh, well, I want you to join that bank or that bank. If that bank is insisting on their staff complying with minimum international standards of inclusivity, If you want to get that job, get on the program. That's the message. And that's a very important message, I think, that the younger generation has got, and the surveys clearly say that, but the older generation can recognise the business case. And the government understands and responds to the business case far quicker than it does to the case put forward by civic society. The development of race discrimination legislation was stalled for decades, and it was only when the big chambers of commerce started coming out and positively saying, no, what is Hong Kong doing? You need to have this legislation. Did Hong Kong government start to act? It listens to business far more than to NGOs, or even cases, as you can see, they'll delay and delay. So business has a role to play in the bigger sphere. It has a role to play, I think, in lobbying functional constituency members. The banking industry should be lobbying the banking functional constituency member, who will undoubtedly be anti-LGBTI rights. So tell that person, our votes will go to the person who understands our message. The insurance industry, why is the insurance industry lobbying the functional constituency member and saying, our vote will go to someone who will vote in this way? Make them think that their place in LegCo counts on being more open. Because they just see this as being, oh, well, it's our role to fall in line with the government's thinking, which at the moment is undoubtedly led by Carrie Lam, who has very deep-held Catholic views. And so, big business has a role to play to make that change. In that level, and also minor level, just within the companies, within the industry groups, within chambers of commerce. Practically every aspect of life, you could have an impact, whether it's from changing the loos to be gender neutral, to handing out cupcakes on Valentine's Day. All these are positive messages that, and I'm glad you mentioned it, in my view, should be led from the top, because only from the top will it change from being a tick box exercise by the lower executives in the HR department to real change, cultural change within the corporate body.
So that leads to another question from actually the audience to Monica. What KPIs should be set, and how should we go about doing that in a corporation?
So KPIs and metrics in terms of diversity and inclusion, I'm assuming. And there's, I guess, a number of ways. So diversity is around ensuring that we have as diverse a group of people in our organisation in terms of gender, age, educational background, etc. So certainly creating some dashboards and understanding what your diversity mix is. In our case, diversity for us is also about sort of representing our patient community, our stakeholders, etc. So it's around creating a sense of what that is. It's around identifying where your gaps are and then setting some clear metrics. So gender, for example, is one of our metrics, and we've got some global specifics around that. As mentioned, in Asia, we're just in the process of identifying what our focus areas are around diversity inclusion. So our intent is to be able to come up with some specific KPIs and metrics that we can measure over time. But diversity will, so diversity is does provide you with a lot of data. Opportunities are there. The other key area to measure, in my view, is around engagement. So it's the inclusive. So how do you measure inclusiveness? And inclusiveness is about creating an environment where all of us can be our best. We can show our uniqueness. We can contribute, add value. We're heard. We're included. And so our engagement surveys are a really, I think, a very efficient and a very effective way to do that. It's important that your questions are targeted. And again, you can measure progress over time. The important thing, though, if you're wanting to drive change, is around intentional actions. So it's around being really clear where you want to move the needle, what's most important to you, and then creating some specific measurements around that, and then engaging both your leaders and your employees in terms of solutioning that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Hope that's helpful.
So we are running out of time, but I would like, if Anita, seeing 5 years down the line, say, for Hong Kong, what do you think, what do you expect some changes to happen, and any closing remarks you might have?
I think the journey is very long. And as I said, we are a generation that started to learn about this, including myself. You know, I'm humbled to be here. I was in the journey of learning. I think, you know, it takes both small stuff and big things like what Michael mentioned, the industry, you know, whether it's financial, MNC, local corporates, to help push the agenda to get the broader population in Hong Kong to understand the issues. And, you know, the support on the QT case was very impressive. I think, you know, for people to stand up together, I think more needs to do. But honestly, I think it's a difficult journey. If you talk about 5 years, I would assume this is still a very slow progress. We wanted more of these forums happen, but actually we wanted people who don't understand the LGBT plus issues to come here, not people who are the keen supporter, because we need to convert those who are not converted, not the converted one. I think that would be, you know, something to start from small. But
Thank you. And we're getting questions from the audience. So I think this is perhaps for everyone here, or Michael, do you think that greater involvement of mainland China in Hong Kong politics make LGBT change easier or harder?
Frankly, I've over the years, if the mainland associated press, if I can put it like that we have in Hong Kong, is anything to judge by, there is no real resistance from mainland China to LGBTI change here in Hong Kong. With the Billy Leung case, we're having the usual mouthpieces, which were very neutral, if not supportive. Same with the W case. I mean, mainland China recognized the transgender, post-operative transgender person's right to marry before Hong Kong. Singapore had done before Hong Kong. So, you know, I don't think it's really on the radar. I think the only real problem that the mainland may have is if, I don't know, I think this is what confronts LGBTI groups in China, is the fact that they are organized. That's what concerns China, not the content of what it's about.
Okay. So shall we look at the results of the poll, please? So we have 64% yeses and 36% noes on the questions. Not particularly surprising, of course, but shall we open?
Could I just add?
Yes,
you know,
yes.
in this week where we have had, you know, same-sex marriage legalized in Taiwan, a place with clearly Chinese cultural values, which is again is one of the major arguments against change here in Hong Kong. You know, where there is that development in our sister country, our neighbor, Hong Kong has had two major government-linked organizations, the MTR and Airport Authority, at first instance rejecting adverts of two men holding hands. Nothing more controversial than that, number one. And two, over the weekend, and this is a real concern, the newly appointed chair of the EOC, Ricky Chu, coming out and apparently rolling back the EOC's position on same-sex marriage. And that is a big concern, because that is supposed to be the organization that is pushing for inclusion and diversity. And when the leader is saying the wrong things, we need to sit up and be concerned, and we need to talk. So in business, next time you get a chance to talk to a government minister or or an LegCo member, or any opportunity at any cocktail function at all, lob it in there. Because feedback needs to come forward. So, and seize any opportunity. Any cocktail party you find me at, I will be talking to people about these issues. And so that's what your CEOs and the people who go to these functions and who go to these government meetings, you need to be lobbing that in there, in my view.
So thank you all. Please give a round of applause to our panelists. And I would like to invite Simon for the next session. Thank you.